Hello and welcome to the first video of 2024, and this is slightly different from my usual thing because on this occasion we're going to be looking at a Warhammer 40,000 Titan. Now for those unfamiliar, this is a model kit, not the sort of thing I would usually feature on the channel, and it's made by Games Workshop, who for newcomers are the company that make those very small wargaming miniatures. Now as you can see, this isn't a small miniature, this is in fact the largest model that Games Workshop do. It's meant to be like a giant walking robot that sort of towers over the battlefield. Now it isn't the sort of thing I'd normally include in my channel, and for those who are new to the channel, what I normally do here is go over my own build, so that can be sculptures. I've done a fair few mechs in my time, costume pieces, kind of anything that really comes to mind, but the focus is really on making things from scratch rather than working on model kits. And don't worry, I'm not turning into a Warhammer channel, there are plenty of great channels out there that do that, but because this was such a large project and because it incorporated a lot of techniques and skills that I've developed working on my own projects, I thought it would be worth including on the channel anyway, because let's face it, it's just a giant walking robot, so what's not to like? So in this video I'm just going to go over the project, to go through some of the techniques that I use and some of the details of the piece, so let's get started. So on the face of it, this is actually quite an intimidating build. It comes in two very large boxes with hundreds of components, as you can see here. Now this is all cast resin, so it's right up my street because a lot of my projects are made with cast resin. But obviously this is a large professionally produced kit, so it's incredibly detailed, far beyond anything that I could probably produce myself, I think. And there's a bit of a process to putting this together. They recommend washing all the pieces because they seem to use mold release on a lot of their pieces, so they come out quite slimy. And you have to get rid of that by washing them in a detergent. So there's a real process for actually preparing the model. Once I'd done a cleaning up process, so got all of the mould release off, cleaned up mould lines and cut off all the gates, I could sort of start putting the thing together. Now I'm used to doing Warhammer 40,000 miniatures. That's what got me into sculpture and model making in the first place. But as you can see here, this piece is absolutely huge compared to a regular Warhammer miniature. This is the sort of torso section of the model, sitting next to a regular Warhammer model there, and as you can see, it's absolutely colossal. So this is much more in line actually with a lot of the mechs that I've produced myself. They're sort of similar size. This is bigger, I think, than anything I've produced, perhaps other than the green robot here, just in terms of height. But nevertheless, it's resin pieces, it's painting, it's assembly, so this was kind of in an area that I was used to, really. So while this does initially appear to be quite an intimidating piece to get, actually it was all pretty familiar. You know, once I'd done the cleaning process, it was just putting it all together, patching it up and painting it. So I sort of felt quite at home doing this. Now there are a lot of Warhammer 40,000 channels which go into painting, so I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because, you know, there are plenty of people who can paint far better than I can. Nevertheless, what I did with this was to use some Army Painter sprays as a base coat. So what I would do is spray the pieces with a brown undercoat. I'd give it a bit of shading with some black. What I would then do is use some chipping medium and then put a top layer of acrylic over that and then chip that away to give a nice weathered effect. What I'd then do is come in over the top with various oils to try and differentiate the colour scheme, give it some weathering, give it some variation in colour. And I can mention the Grimdark Compendium painting channel has been really useful in sort of formulating how I went about doing this. So that was the sort of basic approach I did for this. Obviously I varied the colour to give it some variation. But one thing that you would often do in Warhammer is to actually use OSL, which is object source lighting. What that means really is just painting the model as though there were light falling on it. So you can see in this example I've got some green light kind of playing over the model. I've just painted that on with some green paint. Now part of the reason for doing that is that working LEDs into such a tiny model is nigh on impossible. So if you do want to have some lighting effects on a model this small, the only real way to do it is really to paint them on. But of course for the Titan it's absolutely massive, so I started thinking, well, you know, I could actually put some LEDs in this quite easily. I've done it with plenty of my mechs previously, and so I know how to do it. And actually I think the people that modelled the Titan have actually created it with that in mind, because a lot of the lights you see here, generally speaking, are about 5mm or 10mm, so they exactly match the diameter of various LED sizes you can buy. So what I found myself doing was grinding out these lights and putting LEDs in, and I would find that the LEDs fit exactly once I'd done that. So that was relatively easy because it did really feel that the makers had put this together with that in mind. Now obviously a major modification that I did was to the gun here. This is what's called a Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator, and I don't normally go for energy weapons. I much prefer sort of regular sort of like Gatling guns and cannons and so forth, so I wasn't originally going to go for this, but looking at the way it's put together, it has these sort of like I don't know what you would call them, sort of like plasma bits on the side, and I started thinking, well, you know, if I were to cast those up in clear resin and put some LEDs behind, that would look really, really cool. So I decided to go for this gun. There's a variety of ones available, but this is the one I bought, and actually, as you can see in the pictures, it's come out pretty well. So the way I did this was to use some NeoPixel strips, and they're powered by an Arduino, which is a small programmable computer basically. I've had a play with these previously on previous projects, so you might remember these NeoPixel rings I used in this mask from some time ago. So I sort of know what I'm doing with this, but it's been a while since I did anything like this, so I had to sort of relearn a lot of it, and actually I'd deleted the software off my computer, so I was sort of coming to this from scratch. Nevertheless, it turned out to be pretty easy to do this. There's plenty of tutorials online, and you don't have to program it yourself. I really just downloaded some code from a website and just modified it to do what I wanted it to do, and that wasn't that hard to do. I'm not saying there's a bit of a learning curve with it, but it's not as complicated as it looks. I would encourage people to have a go at this if they want to try the same thing. So what I actually did was take some pieces from the gun, and one nerve-wracking part was that I actually had to start cutting them up in order to make the mould. So I cut this section off the gun and made a mould of it, and I then poured in some clear resin. This is one of the parts that I didn't end up using, but as you can see, it's actually relatively opaque. It doesn't look too translucent, but when you shine a light behind it, it actually glows quite nicely and sort of diffuses the light quite nicely. So that was sort of a happy accident really, and that came out kind of well. So here's one of my original tests, and I've got the gun taped together here with one clear resin section in place. But as you can see, that's looking pretty good. So once I had that working, that gave me the confidence to actually do that for all four pieces. So here it is pulsing away, and at the minute it's only elastic banded together, but you get the idea. So that seemed to be pretty good. So what I needed to do now is to actually carve out a large cavity in the end of the gun, and that section on the right, and that was to allow all of those wires to be accommodated inside. There's actually 12 wires coming out the back of it. Luckily a lot of those can be joined together, so you actually only end up with 3. Nevertheless, I needed some space within the resin to accommodate all of that. So I just got the Dremel to that and carved out a large section. Once I'd done that, I was able to then screw this together, and finally there's the piece painted. So I'm pretty happy with the way that's looking, and obviously got a really nice lighting effect on there as well, so that came out really well actually, so I was really pleased with that. And there's a shot of it mounted on the Titan. So if we look under the hood, as it were, I left the top unglued so I could actually take it apart for maintenance. But if you look in there, there's like a mass of wires, and what I've actually got here is 12 volts coming in, and that all goes to this breadboard to which all of the LEDs are attached. I've then also got another unit which steps the voltage down to 5 volts, and that in turn powers the Arduino, which powers the LEDs in the plasma annihilator. So there's a lot of wiring in there, and it does actually get a little bit warm, but so far it seemed pretty reliable, so it's not stopped working. So yeah, that's working pretty well. Now something else that I couldn't resist doing was to include a bit of a diorama base here, and this was sort of for 2 reasons really. One, because I just really enjoy doing dioramas, but also I wanted to make sure that the scale of the Titan was properly indicated. So having some buildings and some small guys down on the base, I think really just helped sell the scale of the model. So I had obviously a bunch of Warhammer models available, some that I'd painted already, some that I hadn't, and I just started piecing together a base here and a sort of little scene involving some Necrons and some Space Marines. I wanted to have the Titan stepping on a tank, so this is like a super heavy tank, which would normally be quite a powerful unit in the game, but I like the fact that the Titan's just easily crushed it beneath its foot. It's also standing on a building here, and the reason these are here is because it's such a model, it's really heavy, and the way I dealt with that was to drive some very long wood screws through the base of the feet into the lower legs, and I needed to attach them to something. So the tank and the building both hired a large block of wood that the Titan is screwed to, and then those bits of wood are in turn screwed to the base. So it's partially scenic, just to give some visual detail, but also it's mechanical, so it can actually hold this huge weight of this model above the base. And I also want to include some lighting here, so I've got some burning barrels and some light flickering in the windows here. These flickering orange LEDs are fantastic, and they just really do add a certain something to absolutely everything. I've also got some within the body of the Titan itself, the idea being that perhaps it's burning hot from its reactor. So it just really adds some life to it rather than a static light. I also really wanted to do a snowy base. I think snow just adds a certain something to a scene, adds a real level of detail, and really I think helps sell the scale. So I was very keen to do a snow scene. So obviously I've glued all that on, and that's from a company called Precision Ice and Snow, and I used these on my Demon mech from some years back. I think the company's since gone out of business, unfortunately, so I had to be quite careful and with what I had, but luckily I just about had enough to do the whole thing. And as you can see, I've also got some snow on the Titan itself as well. I've just put that in corners here and there. I kind of figured if this thing's walking about, snow isn't going to settle on it too much. Nevertheless, there's going to be some in the corners and so forth. But again, I think that just adds a level of detail and realism to the piece. I also had some fun just hiding a few little dudes around in the base. So as you can see, there's a Dark Angels Terminator here, just right at the back. I think it just looked kind of cool there. I think the background wall kind of looks a little bit like a cathedral, so I think the sort of monk look that he has with the robes kind of fit in quite well there. What I've also got is a couple of Chaos guys hiding around the corner here, like waiting to ambush the Space Marines perhaps. So it was really fun just adding little details here and there for viewers to find as they went looking. I also made a bunch of moulds of this. I actually moulded some pieces of the Titan for future use, so I can use them in bases. You know, have a big Diarama base with a dead Titan in it would look quite cool. But I also made some moulds of some scenery, and I used that to make this elevated base here as well. So it was a really easy way to add a nice sort of presentation base to the piece. Right, so there we go. So I think that's it for this one. Like I say, slightly different from my usual builds, but I'll be back with a few more in the future. So for the time being, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.